Hey, Court Jones here, and welcome to the student critique video for lesson 14 on studying the masters of caricature. Now, in the main lesson, I had talked a lot about doing master studies of famous caricaturists for the purpose of improving your own personal style, so hoping the master artist's style will influence the look of your own drawings. But it actually goes beyond that. I was really hoping the main point of the lesson that you'd get would be that doing master studies when it comes to caricature is a little different than when you study, a traditional artist. When you do caricature studies of artists you admire, what I'm hoping you'll get out of it is actually helping you to figure out how they exaggerated, what their exaggeration choices were, how they made these wacky choices be so amazingly successful. Because if you're like me, you have a certain way of doing things, a certain road or a path you stay on, and you evolve over time slowly, but you sometimes see an artist's work, you just are amazed at what they did and you wonder how they did it. Well, when you do a study of their work, when you break it down, when you block it in, do a sketch of it, and then try to finish it to a rendering, you get inside their head a little bit, and hopefully a little bit of what makes them who they are will rub off on you. Not that you want to be a clone of them or draw exactly like them, but I just want these master artists to have a good effect on you. And the more of these studies you do from various artists, the more you'll sort of pick up. So you don't want to add to their exaggeration. You don't want to distort things or caricature them even more. You want to just get from them what they put into the drawing and take that back with you. You don't want to add your own statement to theirs. So some artists had a little bit of trouble doing that and some troubles with accuracy. At the end of the video, I'll talk about some of the traits in common people had when they were doing these studies. So anyway, let's take a look at some work and see what we can find out what people did. Alrighty, and here we have Danilo Hokama Goveia's study of Ewan McTavish's Burt Reynolds. Looks like Ewan's work is on the left here. There wasn't a photo reference posted with this in the original Facebook post, so I just found my own Burt Reynolds photo just to give people a sense of what he looks like, even though it's not the exact same angle. I see here Ewan's original sketch and Ewan's painting. And what you've done is actually do a line drawing, like an ink style drawing of it. And that's fine. In fact, I do encourage people to do more drawn studies of other people's work rather than attempting paintings before they're ready. But with that said, your ink drawing, your lines are a little stiff, a little bit lifeless, and there are some general problems on the small scale with how you render the features and the forms. Some forms are more exaggerated and distorted in your sketch, and some are sort of under-exaggerated or under-indicated or simplified, I might say, like Burt Reynolds' eyes here. So if you take a look at your eye compared to the eye in Ewan's drawing, it's just a little bit simplified, and I guess that's perhaps just your style, but I would try to get a little bit more naturalistic feeling. You can do that with your line quality and also just the subtlety of the shapes that you draw, just a little bit more, slightly more complexity to them, not overly complex, because Ewan has a style that's where he is simplifying the forms quite a bit and redrawing them in his own language, sort of in the style of like the way David O'Keefe does, where he redesigns more graceful shapes than are in the original sketch, or that are in the original photo reference, I should say. So think about that too. Think about where you want to put curved lines next to straight lines. Perhaps it's not that clear from my overdrawing just because it's a lot of complex shapes, but what I'm trying to show you with this is how you render the individual lines and the strokes that you do. Since you're working with ink in a real limited fashion, every single line you do matters even more than it does in something like the original painting that Ewan did or the original sketch, because he has a lot more lines and shadows and halftones and things to work with. When you have such a limited line language like this, when you're drawing more like Hirschfeld does, every line matters, and you have to put a lot more thought into what you do because there's less there for the viewer to latch onto. So everything that you do is an indication of body type, of the shape of the feature, if someone's angular or rounded. All those things are going to have to be really clear in your line drawing. Is this a rounded form? Is this a straight form? Can the lines be designed any more gracefully than what I've done? Or do they feel sort of non-committal and haphazard and a little sloppy? In line drawing, you can't be super sloppy unless that's your particular style you're working towards. Like a jittery line, sort of like the artist John Cuneo, has a really fun ink style that's almost like done with a trembling hand, but it's done consistently and it's intentional. It's part of his look and his style. Whereas someone like Tom Richmond has an ink style that's a lot more deliberate and more controlled lines, where there's thick, where there's thin lines, and the lines are very well designed. So you want to decide what kind of ink artist you want to be and work towards that and be more careful about how you lay in your lines. That being said, I'm not sure if I mentioned you did get a good likeness on him, though. You could tell it's Burt Reynolds. It's pretty reasonable approximation of what the original artist did. Just watch out that you're not exaggerating or the forms or distorting them more than the original. I can see his, another thing that just jumps out at me right now is his cheek on the far side on Ewan's original drawing is much more of a graceful question mark shape, sort of a curved shape. And you've got these compound lines here where it's sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's just sort of broken up and the contours are exaggerated. Whereas in reality, you'd want to do something a little bit more graceful and simple, leading in from the cheek down to the chin. So just little things like that. It's just about subtlety. It's about, paying attention to those smaller details. When they're small in their details, but they add up and they multiply on one another to create overall an effect that drifts away further and further from the original that you're trying to replicate. Here's another study that Danilo did of McTavish, a sketch of John Dillinger. Good likeness. Again, you're doing that sort of stiff ink drawing style. I do kind of like the way this one's going. This feels a little bit more deliberate than the Burt Reynolds. The lines feel more controlled, like you have more of a vision for what you're trying to achieve. McTavish's original sketch is a little bit more organic, more sketchy, and yours is reduced to just simple lines, and that's totally okay. But just like I said with the other Burt Reynolds sketch, you have to really pay attention to the quality of each line, where it's thin, where it's thick, where it's straight, where it's curved. It's a challenging way to work, if you're not just doing a pencil sketch replication of someone's work, but actually redesigning them into your own brand of inking. That's a tough task you've given yourself. If that wasn't your intention, if you weren't trying to redefine this McTavish caricature into your own visual language, if that's just the way you work, maybe think about going back to a pencil look, where you're drawing more organically and more sketchy the way the original artist did, and try to replicate that as best you can. But that's just a suggestion. It's not really necessary to the exercise. I think you overall did a really good job and captured the look of the original sketch and got the likeness. It's just, I don't see all the same kind of structure because you're using different visual language than the original artist did, so I don't see the halftones or, you got some of the halftones indicated with cross-hatching lines, but then there are other places where, on the left side of the face you have cross-hatch shading on your sketch, but on the right side you're missing that cross-hatching because, the artist didn't do it in the original, but there is sort of a painted halftone in there that you could be using your own ink lines to define those plane changes, and you're not. So it feels a little incomplete maybe in that respect on your study. And here Danilo went the extra step and actually created a new original caricature in the style of Ewan McTavish, using the lessons he learned from doing those studies to create his own original. And that's great. This is the complete assignment that I was hoping everyone would do. Now, it suffers from that same problem, though, that I mentioned earlier with you're translating a likeness into simple ink lines. And I have a lot of experience doing live quick sketch caricatures, which is what this is similar to as far as the level of completion, where it's just bold black outlines. And you have some wrinkles and a few other details in there that I maybe wouldn't do in quick sketch. But it's hard to tell if you are actually creating Ewan's style in this ink drawing way. You may, like I said, want to explore pencil sketching and rough sketching rather than doing a ink style drawing. So with that being said, pretty reasonably good likeness of Mr. Hong. This is character actor James Hong. Been in a lot of movies, funny guy, really good look too. And overall you did a good job. It's just, I think some of the features could use a little bit of work, like the nose and the eyes. don't quite feel like this actor's nose and eyes. It might be because you're just reducing the forms into really simple, almost abstract lines, and it could use a little bit more description, a little bit more shading, maybe more cross-hatching. That might help. Like the eyes especially, I think, are lacking sort of the quality of the original actor's shapes. If I were to do a quick tracing, I could show you what I mean. So I see Mr. Hong's eye on the right is more open than the one on the left. It has a more graceful curving arc, whereas you made it sort of squared off. And you're also missing the quality of his epicanthic fold. It doesn't quite look like his eyelid. And if you're gonna do wrinkles from the eyes, his wrinkles aren't very prominent in this photo, maybe because of the lighting, but I would connect them to the corners of the eyes rather than having the wrinkles just floating out in space. That's sort of a design choice, but it makes it look a little bit more intentional than rather than just having sort of randomly floating in the middle of a form. And you can see almost all of the pupil and iris because he's opening this eye quite a bit. And then because he is raising, this eye is open because he is raising that eyebrow on the right, and you can raise your eyebrow a little bit higher too in your original sketch. He has a pretty thinly spaced hairs on his eyebrow. They're not very heavy. So keep that in mind too, that you're trying to capture the quality of this person's features and not just their shape and placement, but how they're specific to him. And because of the lighting's coming from the right, there's more of a shadow on the left here, so if you are working with lines here, if you don't want to do too much actual, shading and keep it simple, just think about how you would represent that lighting with this simple ink style. Personally, I would actually drop down the nose a little bit more. I mean, I like the long fill trim you gave him, the long upper lip, and we have to lower the lower face to make that still work with a longer nose. I just feel like you gave him too short of a nose for his facial type. I think a longer nose is in order. But that's just me, that's my own personal opinion on the exaggeration. Doesn't mean I'm right and that's the only way to do it. I'm just reacting to what I see here in this particular situation. So I'm not going to redraw the whole face, just a little portion here, just some of the problem areas I was seeing. Just keep that in mind when you're doing your own drawings. Once you've got the big shapes figured out, the placement of everything, then you have to focus on the quality of each feature and how each one is rendered, where the thin lines are, where the thick lines are, and then the shape of each feature, where the high point is of that eyelid, where the low point is, how much of the iris or the pupil can you see, what's the quality of the eyebrows, all those things I went over. It's really important in caricature to get those things figured out, especially when you're using such a simple visual language like this pen and ink style, because you have so few lines to describe to tell the viewer who this is and what their physicality is like. Also, one more thing, I wanted to go over a list of several other caricature artists who we didn't get a chance to study in the main lesson or in the premium videos, but they definitely deserve your attention or a look. If you don't know who they are, I wanted to expose you to some new artists that you might find inspiring as well. Someone you could take a look at is John Kascht. Did a lot of illustration work over the years. He has a really graceful, beautiful watercolor style. And then there's Dan Adel, who's an illustrator and portrait artist who, he doesn't exaggerate a whole lot, but his editorial work, the bodies and situations that he does with his caricatures are just phenomenal and tell a great story. He's really inspiring to look at. Mort Drucker, the legendary Mad magazine artist who really started it all and was the inspiration for a lot of us. You definitely need to be familiar with Mort's work. Jason Seiler, probably one of the best caricature illustrators working today. His paintings, his portraits, his illustrations are all really, really great to look at. Really nice guy, and you'll appreciate his work. I'm sure you all know it already. Bruce Stark is more of a classic caricature illustrator guy from back in the day, and he has a lot of great stuff that has a sort of a Mad Magazine feeling, but really inspiring watercolors. Just take a look at his work, you won't regret it. Dominic Philibert is another artist and illustrator whose work is just amazing, just tremendous exaggerations, and his paintings are so realistic while at the same time being expressive and highly exaggerated. Tom Fluharty is another caricature illustrator you should take a look at. His paintings are just phenomenal. His drawings and sketches will just blow your mind, and really, really fun stuff. David Cowles, or Cowles, not really quite sure how to say his last name, more of an abstract caricature artist, but there's a lot that you can learn from the abstract artists, even if you're not working in that particular style. It's actually a lot harder in many ways than doing traditional drawings. So definitely take a look at David's work for some inspiration. Herman Mejia is another artist whose work you should check out. His watercolors are great, and he even has done some sculpted caricatures that are just phenomenal. Steve Brodner is another artist you should look at, does a lot of political editorial caricatures with a really unique visual language that he puts into his work, and they're very simple and just so effective. Jota Leal is a caricature fine artist whose work I think was originally inspired a lot by Kruger, but now he's really gone off and done his own thing, and his caricatures are just super unique and really inspiring to look at. John Cuneo, or Cuneo, I love his work. He does a lot of pen and ink and watercolor work that has just such a particular and unique style that's almost a little messy, a little sketchy, but that's what I really like about that. He does that sloppy sort of style really well. Then there's Ji Ding, who's a Chinese-born caricaturist living in Austria, whose paintings are just phenomenal. He does a range of styles. He's been getting into doing simplified anime or animation style caricatures, but his lighting and the techniques he uses to build his paintings are really something to check out. And then there's, of course, historical caricature artists who aren't around anymore, like Al Hirschfeld was sort of the main caricaturist of the 20th century. His simple, really just elegant line work was the inspiration for a lot of artists getting into caricature. Then going back a little further, there was the French artist Daumier, who did a lot of editorial work back in, I think it was in the 1900s or 19th century, and did a lot of sculpted caricatures too of different character types, and they're just so fun and really cool. And then there's the famous French impressionist Claude Monet, who in his early days did caricatures for money on the side, I guess, but he was really good at them. Kind of wish he'd actually stuck more with caricatures. He could have gone really far with that. So there's a lot more that I'm not mentioning that I've probably forgotten, and forgive me if there's artists you like that I didn't bring up, but that's just a few that I think you should check out. If you don't know, you should really know their work because they're the true modern masters of caricature. So that's just a quick taste, sampling of what the premium students get. In the premium version of this critique video, I go over a lot more students' works where they study master caricatures. Some of the problems I noticed in common with most of the artists doing these studies is that the drawing wasn't done carefully enough. They seem to maybe rush through that to get to the painting or to get to the inking or whatever the finished medium was. And there were inaccuracies and distortions and just outright exaggerations on top of the original caricature. And for this exercise, I want you to think of it more like a portrait exercise where you're trying to capture exactly what the reference material is. It's just in this case, the reference material is someone's caricature. I just don't want you to add to it or distort it accidentally. What you're trying to do with these is figure out what the original artist was thinking, how they came up with their exaggeration choices. And by going through the same motions, by drawing those shapes yourself, hopefully some of that intuition will be absorbed by you so that you can regurgitate that and incorporate that into some of your own original caricature work. Thanks for joining me, thanks for watching, and thanks for everybody for submitting their master studies. It's pretty challenging, and most of you did a really good job. The drawing really is what matters. It's all about drawing. Really, with every lesson, that should be the main point, is drawing, but this one especially too, because accuracy is really a concern when doing master studies. But I hope you had fun with it, and I'll see you next time.